Hey everyone, I'm RVRocks, and video game sequels are kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes you get epic deviations from the first that improve the original gameplay perfectly in every possible way. Sometimes you get reinventions of gameplay that make it so every game in the series brings its own thing to the table. Sometimes you just get more of the first game. And sometimes you get Dead Space 3. Video game sequels are unique in comparison to movie sequels because more so in video games than in movies, there's a bajillion different ways you could do a sequel and still have it land with your target audience. I mean, look at some of the most highly regarded video game sequels of all time. It's just what I said earlier. Deviations from the first that improve the gameplay in every possible way, reinventions of the gameplay that make it so the prior ones all have their own niche, and more of the first. But all of them, critical masterpieces, and justifiably so in my opinion. Because in the immortal words of Schafrillas Productions, there is no such thing as a perfect movie, or in this case video game, but there is such a thing as a perfect sequel. To summarize a channel much bigger than I, there are too many things at play at any given time for something to be truly perfect. Like for any video game that you love, there's probably still a few valid criticisms that you can look at and be like, okay, it's not perfect. For example, Breath of the Wild could have had a more involved story. Mother 3's inventory system is a bit clunky. Overwatch's entire experience hinges on making the lone player feel good, and the game itself suffers as a result. Grand Theft Auto 5 having multiple different endings really impacts its power as a story, especially when one is so much better than the other two. Minecraft lacks an involved endgame, so most people just drop it after a week or two of binging. All of these games I just mentioned are some of my favorite games of all time, and I don't think any of these criticisms qualify as nitpicks. And trust me when I say I don't think any of these things lower the quality of the game. I just think they're weaknesses that could be overcome to make an even better experience. Point being, no game is perfect, there will never be a perfect game, stop rating things 10 out of 10. But a perfect sequel is a lot more achievable, because a perfect sequel performs its function as a sequel perfectly, regardless of the individual quality of the game. So going back to Schafrillas once again, his criteria for a perfect sequel is 1. Expand the universe of the first in meaningful ways. 2. Continue the story in a new and compelling way. 3. Expand the themes from the original or introduce new compelling themes. And 4. Leave an undeniable impact on the franchise. Once again, I feel the need to reiterate this criteria was made for movies and not video games. So you know what, let's add our own 5th category. In a video game sequel, you must also improve or reiterate the gameplay in fresh ways. A few examples of perfect video game sequels would be Super Mario Sunshine, Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back, and The Last of Us 2, which, even if you didn't like it, it did do all these things. A perfect example of how a perfect sequel is not a perfect game. So all this sequel talk is good, because I just talked about a game that I love that recently had a sequel come out. Here's the thing though, while HuniePop was a very good sex game, HuniePop 2 feels like a very good game that just so happens to have sex as a major game mechanic. And it is also, by my estimation, a perfect sequel, doing everything that I listed earlier to the main HuniePop franchise, and also going that extra mile. But before we get started, I'm going to be talking a lot about how HuniePop 2 stacks up to the original. So if you want to know the story of the original HuniePop's development, or lore, or gameplay, go watch the other video I made, because today we are just looking at sequels. So let's look at the criteria I listed a second ago for a perfect sequel, and see just how HuniePop 2 fits into that role. I'll be honest, HuniePop didn't really have a universe to begin with. Other than the knowledge that catgirls, love fairies, and aliens existed in this universe, it was basically just a more perverted version of our own. HuniePop 2 starts off with a cutscene that feels like it's from a different game, starting off with the origin of these creatures known as the Nymphogen, giant space ladies who will blow up the planet unless they're laid good enough. So naturally, you're the perfect fit to take care of them, except for one small detail. There are 2 Nymphogen, and you're not experienced with threesomes. So off to the vacation hotspot in Adepuna, with 2 goals. Practice your threesomes to summon the Nymphogen, and save the world. Right off the bat, you are learning more and more about the world this game takes place in. While Adepuna is a standard vacation hotspot with standard vacation locales to boot, its addition to the HuniePop world makes perfect sense and is delightfully corny in both name and look. But once again, the world of HuniePop is basically just a mirror version of our own, but with a lust-driven sub-community in the Love Fairies. Learning that there are more ethereal beasts also driven by lust isn't surprising or out of left field, but rather a natural and understandable development for the series. There are probably a large amount of horny species in this universe, knowing that there are sexy eldritch beasts, cats, fairies, and aliens. but I'm starting to stumble into. HuniePop was not really a story game, and while this one has a story with a beginning, middle, and end, HuniePop is still all about the characters, and what they're all about. And let me tell you, here, all of that has been developed tenfold. The girls who are returning from the last game have gone through several changes, not all of which positive, and the player character has ascended from a lame virgin to someone who can basically stare at someone and get them to sleep with him, upgrading from a boring-ass apartment to what looks to be a penthouse in a big city. And that upgrade to the protagonist's lady skills reflects in the gameplay in a large way. HuniePop was all about sleeping with women, and learning about them was your vehicle to do just that. HuniePop 2, however, seems to be in reverse. Due to your search for threesomes being the driving plot of this game, the dates and sex are all in pursuit of character interaction and developing relationships between characters. Oftentimes when choosing which date we were going to go on next, it boiled down to which characters had the most interesting dynamic. Like, ooh, the annoying weeb and the cool tomboy. How the fuck is them being attracted to each other gonna play out? And yes, I said we. Me and my girlfriend played this together, swapping out who was in control every once in a while. Take that, commenters who said I must be lonely because I'm talking about sex games. Anyways, last time I mentioned how one of HuniePop's biggest strengths was how much it makes you feel for the girls, and that continues on just as strongly here. Every line of dialogue resulted in either ahs, laughs, or in Sarah's case, pure, unadulterated hate from my girlfriend. Which was then met with me laughing my ass off. With that, I should get into the girls that you'll be meeting. There's the aforementioned Sarah, or Suki, who's a mega weeb obsessed with Japanese culture, whose voice actress is clearly having way too much fun with the role.
Konnichiwa. O genki desu ka?
The flight attendant turned fashion designer Lola, and the porn star turned depressed out of touch with her daughter mom Jessie make a return from the last game. Unaffectionate wife Brooke, model and all-around Australian bro Ashley, her cousin, the goth stereotypical teenager Lillian, the robot lady Zoe, who turns out to be surprisingly endearing, the dumb southern belle Candy, the street girl and tomboy Nora, the tonally whiplashing innocent Lailani, the sex-obsessed Abia, whose voice actress is also having way too much fun with the role.
My name is Labia. Abia. Sorry.
And the clumsily handled Polly, who is your traditional housewife and also a YouTuber. The last 5 being my personal favorites, but once again, the voice actresses are all doing such a good performance that they all manage to be incredibly likable. Even Sarah manages to be endearing with just how god-awful she can be. Once again, the whole HuniePop experience is more dependent on the honeys, not the popping. While seeing the sex is pretty cool, and is likely the main reason a lot of people got into these games, I cared far more about seeing the characters interact. While the overarching story may not be the most involved, the small interpersonal relationships that these girls form with each other are very endearing. And oftentimes, the player character isn't even acknowledged all that well. You're just along for the ride on this one. This game isn't about you. It's about them. And while my heart may yearn for some of the girls left behind in the last game, the new girls that they brought along for this journey have really won me over. There's not really a bad egg amongst the cast of this game. My one complaint is that some of the girls' excuses to be compatible with each other are a bit weak, and I wish that all of the different combinations of girls were possible. Although I could see why that would be a large undertaking. And lastly, since I can't really talk about it anywhere else in this video, the music in this game is a huge step up. The last game had mostly negligible tracks, some even sounding like they were heavily compressed for whatever reason, but this game had multiple tracks that kept my head bobbing, and that's saying something when the main object of this game is having sex. Anyways, time for the other definition of themes. So, HuniePop didn't really have themes, other than like maybe if you try hard enough, you'll achieve your dreams. So maybe it's a moot point to put this here. But as I said earlier, HuniePop 1 facilitates sex through interaction. HuniePop 2 facilitates interaction through sex. And I think that's a very interesting spin on that idea for the sequel. So you know what? Let's stretch the definition of themes to apply to that. Well, your goal is to save the world from space hookers, and that's pretty undeniable. Your character is clearly growing from these interactions, but this kinda goes back to what I said just a few seconds ago. HuniePop isn't really a game that has themes or a story, or one that could leave an impact in the first place. The end of the game kinda fools you into thinking that something is gonna leave an impact, and I'm not gonna spoil it here, but just know that my girlfriend made fun of me for thinking it was legit. That'll make sense if/when you play the game. The overall story of HuniePop has never been something that really matters in the grand scheme of things. So leaving an impact doesn't really matter either. You know what does matter? The gameplay of a video game is really what makes or breaks the experience. As I stated in my first video, certain games can have amazing visuals, interesting lore, a good message, or just be fun. But if the moment-to-moment gameplay fails to keep you engaged, then it fails at being a video game. And this is a place that HuniePop 2 exceeds in greatly. I mean, I can mention how just like last time, you're expected to talk to all the girls in order to surpass your dates. There is still that sense of agency, even more so because now date gifts are equipped to the individual girl as opposed to the player. And there is still always something to do. All of these things carry over from the last game. But new stuff has been added. The double date mechanics allow for some natural spins on the formula. Of course, obviously, you're going on a date with two girls, essentially meaning that each move is now directed at an individual girl. This immediately means that their likes and dislikes carry that much more weight because it is now the main strategy of gameplay. Jessie likes romance, Lola likes talent. Now every time you match a talent token, you're gonna want it to go to Lola. You still only share one affection meter between the girls, but that's just another system for you to keep track of. And speaking of systems, there is a lot to talk about with HuniePop 2. Keeping up engagement is something that this game does amazingly. Each girl now has stamina, meaning that you have to match stamina tokens to keep them in the date. Each girl has 3 sets of baggage, which serve as individual modifiers for each date. These are fun, given to you in a random order, and randomly assigned per date. If I had one larger complaint while playing HuniePop for the last video, it's that in the later hours of the gameplay got stale. Especially when you play the whole game in one 5-hour sitting in order to get footage for a YouTube video. By the time you reach the later dates in the game, you have the same game plan, more or less. You have all the gifts you want to give your date, you have the skill trees maxed out, it falls off a little bit. And while that still kind of happens here, between the date gifts being equipped to the individual girl and the baggages giving you something to think about as the game goes on, even when you completely level up your skill tree, you can't just tune out, you gotta keep your head in the game. Between all the baggages and all the girls, you get some more variety out of your gameplay. And in a game where every interaction is a match 3 puzzle, a little variety goes a very long way. HuniePop was a very fun, very good game, and HuniePop 2 extends on all my favorite parts from the first one, while adding a little bit more to spice it up every now and then. I mean, both games have a post-game challenge mode, but with the enhancements given to HuniePop 2, the challenge mode feels like something I'd actually want to revisit. By all accounts, HuniePop 2 is better than HuniePop 1. My one complaint, where are my girls? Where's Nikki? Where's Belly? Why are the 2 most boring characters from the first game the ones that come back in the second game? I want to see how my interactions with these ladies have made their lives irreparably worse. I kid, but like, HuniePop, give me some DLC. This has made a great date night game and it's just such a perfectly solid experience. But before that, you at home need to experience HuniePop 2. It is quite literally a perfect sequel. And if you think this video was a perfect sequel to the first, then why don't you subscribe to RVRocks and ring the bell, like this video, and comment with your favorites, let's go with favorite pairing from HuniePop 2. Personally, I think I enjoyed Candace and Abia the most. Their dynamic was pretty cute. Although the whole conversation between Zoe and Polly definitely punched Zoe up a few points for me. If you want to play HuniePop 2, it's available on a bunch of different platforms, most notably Steam. And I promise it's actually good. Like, outside of the whole haha funny hentai, it's a really solid experience. But before you do any of that, I have been RVRocks and thank you so much for watching. See ya!